Hello, I'm Rich Eisenberg, Editor-in-Chief of Inorganic Chemistry. As part of our 50th anniversary year, we are having interviews with leaders of the field. Today, we're doing an inorganic chemistry first. We're interviewing a couple, not just one, but two preeminent inorganic chemists. Our interviewees today are Professors Don and Marcetta Darensbourg, both distinguished professors from Texas A&M University. Both Don and Marcetta have won ACS awards in inorganic chemistry and have been active in the Division of Inorganic Chemistry, have been leaders for a number of years, and for full disclosure, have been good friends of mine as well. Welcome, Marcetta. Welcome, Don. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you, Rich.
It's good to be here. Thanks.
Let's start with your early years and how did your interest in science develop? Separately, let me start with Marcetta and then we'll go to Don.
Well, my parents, of course, were the biggest influence on me, and they were school teachers. And I'm from the hills of Kentucky. They were fairly well educated for the hills of Kentucky. And they encouraged me in everything that I've done. My dad was sort of a gee whiz scientist. He was always looking for special things. But I'm sure had he been trained, he would have been a good scientist. I became a chemist because of my high school chemistry teacher, Mrs. Bolton, who I really admired and wanted to be just like her. So then I went to Union College in Barberville, Kentucky, and on to the University of Illinois for my PhD.
Okay, we'll get to Illinois in a second. Don, how about you?
Well, I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and science wasn't a big part of my background. I went to private school, which really had a very weak science curriculum. And my father was a builder, though, and so I was always encouraged. He was good at math. My sister actually majored in math in college, so we were good at math, but science I had very little of. So what I decided to do was to go on to college and be an architect or mechanical engineer, because that's what I was familiar with. And after arriving in Los Angeles for undergraduate school, I really didn't like the mechanical engineering curriculum, and we were required to take freshman chemistry. And I really fell in love with chemistry then, and eventually went on to do undergraduate research with Harold Goldwhite at Cal State LA. And from there, you know, it's sort of history.
Do you think some of the architectural elements that are in chemistry are what really attracted you?
I think building molecules is very much akin to building buildings.
Okay.
It's that same idea and the same satisfaction one gets from making a molecule, determining its structure, et cetera.
Tell our viewers where you went to graduate school, with whom you worked, and what you were doing in graduate school. I think you met in graduate school as well.
Yeah, of course. So I went to Illinois, University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, and decided to focus on inorganic chemistry since that's what I had focused on as an undergraduate. Worked in the area of infrared spectroscopy with Ted Brown. I started actually with Stan Piper, and he passed away during my first year. So I switched to Ted Brown and was the first member of his group to really get involved in metal carbonyl chemistry. We did infrared intensities, which was a rather odd thing to be doing as an inorganic chemist, but you had to synthesize organometallic compounds. So that was the early stages of organometallic chemistry. I actually never had a course in organometallic chemistry because one wasn't offered.
Marcetta?
Well, also at the University of Illinois, and I actually had a bit of a hard time finding a group because some professors didn't want women in their group at the time. But that was the most fortunate thing for me. I ended up with Ted Brown. And he was a wonderful mentor and a very cautious, careful scientist. I probably was the last student to work on his organolithium projects, and he was working on catalysis using anionic polymerization catalysts for olefin polymerizations. I really enjoyed those years. I thought everything that was going on in inorganic chemistry was there at the University of Illinois. And I think I was right for all the physical methods that Russ Drago was developing, the start of materials chemistry that Galen Stuckey was developing, and so much more that I could talk about from those days.
Now, this was sometime in the early, mid-1960s?
I graduated in '67.
Okay.
68.
Yeah. Now, did either of you do postdoctoral work?
Actually, not. My first job after graduate school, after 4 years of graduate school, was at Texaco Research Center in Beacon, New York, which is upriver from the city. And of course, I went there for a reason, and Marcetta can explain that. But I worked with a guy who was very well known for doing adsorbed small molecules on supported catalytic surfaces, a guy named Bob Eischen. So it was sort of a postdoc, but I was paid better than a postdoc. And I had lots of time because of the way industry operated at the time. I had full-time technicians and really wasn't allowed to do much work in the lab myself. So I had lots of time to think about proposal writing, et cetera, and almost immediately decided I wanted an academic job. And Texaco was very nice to me. They allowed me to work for 8 months after I had obtained an academic job.
Very good. Marcetta?
And I also did not have a postdoc immediately after graduate school. I took a position at Vassar College, which is a wonderful undergraduate institution, the best students, and had a research lab, which Don frequented as soon as we were married and together for a couple of years at Vassar. We did some experiments together and published work from that time. I did have my version of a postdoc came with my first sabbatical, and that was with Earl Mutertes when he was still at Cornell. And in a lot of ways, that really gave a huge boost to my career, and he advised me to go study hydrides, Marcetta. And it was sort of like plastics, if you know what I mean.
Yes, I do. I do. Actually, I should point out for our viewers that in the mid-60s, postdocs were not necessarily as required as they are today in terms of getting faculty positions. Now, let me turn back to this idea of from these early studies, what kinds of threads or themes ran through your research from then until today?
Well, I was interested in charge distribution in molecules and how you might probe that in some way with reactivity. We worked together on this because Don was the infrared spectroscopist who understood force constants in metal carbonyls. So we could map this nucleophilic attack on metal carbonyls, in the production of acyl from neutral metal carbonyls and carbanions. So that charge distribution idea carried on for me in my first work with site-specific ion pairing, and then from there on into hydrides.
Yeah, and but then you continued into organic, bio-inorganic chemistry today with iron hydrogenase models, and there is a link.
Oh yes, oh yes. I think those fundamental studies that we did with metal carbonyl hydrides and just metal carbonyl anions